So today I'm going to talk about aging, and hopefully it's riveting enough to keep you awake at 10 a.m. on your Saturday. So why do I want to talk about aging? Well, we could talk about particular diseases, and we will hear about particular diseases this morning. But aging is ubiquitous. It's going to affect every single person in this room, unlike a particular disease. As we get older, chronic disease does tend to increase, but even if you're generally very well, you're going to start aging. In Ireland in particular, we have a very aging population, so that's why I felt in particular it's relevant to us now. So just as an overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'll briefly go through some of the theories of aging that are out there, talk a little bit about aging in Ireland, and then touch on the blue zones. I will then go on to some specific concerns that we would have in our elderly population, and then the evidence behind some lifestyle interventions in preventing or improving these conditions. And then finally, if I have time, I'll just briefly mention some interesting future theories on aging that there are. So as I said, aging affects us all. In Ireland in particular, we have an aging population, and our elderly patients tend to be far more complex cases. So they have multimorbidity, polypharmacy, and increased social issues and needs. Concerningly, with trends in diseases such as diabetes and obesity and heart disease all on the rise, current forecasts suggest that the upcoming generation might actually have a shorter lifespan than their parents. However, when you talk about aging, you would think that most people would want to live quite long. When you ask a group of people, maybe not this group of people, but the general population, do you want to live to your 100? A lot of people will actually say no. And the reasons being, they don't actually want to lose their cognitive functions. They don't want to become a burden for their families. They don't want to end up in a nursing home or needing carers for their basic needs. Basically, they don't want to live to 100. The last decade of their life is not enjoyable, and it's not full of health and vitality. My goal for today will be to highlight that lifestyle methods that we can use to try and not simply survive to a ripe old age, but to actually thrive in your golden years. And try and give our elderly patients and ourselves a sense of hope and a sense of control over your later years. So to go on to the theories behind aging, like how to age well and increase your health span. So when I talk about health span differs from lifespan in that it's defined as years of life free of disease and disability. When we look at the research on aging, there's a number of complex cellular factors that you can see up there. Now I'm not going to go into them all, don't worry. But they come up time and time again, and based on these markers, a number of aging theories have been put forward over the years. Going into the theories, they kind of fall into two main zones, the program theories and the error theories. So program theories, these follow the logic that aging follows a biological timeline, possibly a continuation of the one that regulates our childhood growth and development, and that this regulation would depend on changes in gene expression that affect systems responsible for maintenance, repair, and defense responses. And then we have our error theories, which are a little bit better known. These propose that environmental assaults to the living organism induce damage which accumulate over time, and as these accumulate, we start to see the signs of aging. So to delve into the program theory slightly, there's a theory of programmed longevity. So the idea of programmed longevity suggests that aging is a result of a sequential switching on and off of certain genes, and they define cell senescence as a time when aging starts to cause deficits and diseases. It classifies aging as a primary disorder instigated by our own inner control mechanisms. The endocrine theory, this suggests that our biological clock acts through various hormones that control the pace of aging. And mainly, most of the studies are showing that it's linked to the insulin IGF-1 signaling pathway. The immunological theory, this is based on the idea that, or the fact that our immune system peaks at puberty and then gradually declines thereafter with advancing age. So this would lead to an increased vulnerability to infectious disease and thus aging and death. The error theories, as I said, they're a little bit better known. So the wear and tear theory, as it says, cells and tissues are vital parts and they wear out, resulting in aging. And that parts of the body eventually wear out from repeated use, killing them and then eventually killing the body. There's a rate of living theory, so the greater an organism's rate of basal oxygen metabolism is, the shorter its lifespan. And this is based on studies that have shown that mammals with slower, larger mammals live longer, and they tend to have a slower metabolism than small mammals. Then we have the cross-linking theory. So this is where there's an accumulation of cross-linked proteins, which damages cells and tissues, which then slow down our bodily processes, resulting in aging. And recent studies have shown that cross-linking reactions are involved in age-related changes. So then the free radical theory is possibly the most well-known and one that we'll kind of talk a little bit about today. Biochemist Earl Statman was quoted saying that aging is a disease. The human lifespan simply reflects the level of free radical damage that accumulates in cells. When enough damage accumulates, cells cannot survive properly anymore and they just give up. So the free radicals theory suggests that free radical damage to your cell's mitochondria leads to a loss of cellular energy and function over time. The formation of superoxides in the body, which is a free radical, occurs when oxygen binds to a stray electron, and it is one cause of cellular damage because they're very unstable and violently reactive. When this superoxide comes into contact with your DNA, it can then damage your genes, which if they're not repaired can cause mutations that lead to disease. Antioxidants are our defense mechanism against these volatile free radicals, as they take the electron away from the superoxide and just leave oxygen. You can slow down this process by eating foods rich in antioxidants, which a whole food plant-based diet obviously is. Now, interestingly, they have done some research trying to see would antioxidant supplements work, but so far they have not been shown to work. It has to be within the whole food. Finally, the somatic DNA damage theory. So this proposes that DNA damages are constant in our body, they're always occurring, and eventually over time they accumulate because we just can't repair as fast as the damages occur. The cells then start to deteriorate and malfunction, and we see disease and aging. Whilst there's a number of theories of aging, the reality is that it's most likely a very complex issue with a lot of factors. But given that there's a lot of factors and pathways, that means there's a lot of opportunity for us to try and target things and slow it down. One particular cell feature I do want to highlight is telomeres, because it's fast becoming a hot topic in aging research. And it's mainly based on shortening of telomeres. So a telomere is a region of repetitive nucleotide sequence at the end of our chromosome, and they're like little caps. These function to protect the end of the chromosome from deterioration or from fusion to a neighbouring chromosome. The maintenance of these telomeres appears to be essential for the prolonged persistence of stem cell function in organs with extensive cell turnover. With cell division, it appears that every time our cell divides, the telomeres shorten. So the more a cell divides, the shorter the telomeres become, and eventually they reach a critical length and the cell simply stops replicating, and it'll die off. So eventually that will lead to death of an organism. Some cells do contain an enzyme which is sort of anti-aging called telomerase, which does restore the telomeres, and these are mainly found in things like egg and sperm cells to ensure continual reproduction of these cells. Most normal adult cells lack this capacity. Studies have looked into supplementing telomerase, and it just did not work, and in fact had some negative consequences. So let's step away a little bit from the research and then bring it back to Ireland and see why it's relevant for us. So let's look at how aging affects us in Ireland. Compared to the global average, we're actually not doing too bad in our overall life expectancy. At the last census, we had 456 centenarians, which I was actually quite surprised at. We do have an aging population. There's been a 19% increase in the over 65 category. 10% of the population are currently caring for someone with a chronic condition. So as the levels of our elderly population go up, the level of chronic disease goes up as well, and thus the level of care that these patients need increase. Whilst our life expectancy might be pretty good, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's health span. And as I said, often it's provided care by a family member who have to give up work, which has ramifications for employment and our economy as a whole as well. So looking at the Irish Health Survey back in 2015, particularly the over 75 category, 59% reported they had a chronic condition and 87% are already on a prescription medication. And about half of them said that they were limited by the condition. Concerningly, almost a quarter said that they reported feeling depressed to some degree. On the bright side, 92% have been to see their GP in the last year, 52% went to see their consultant, and the average number of visits was actually 9.9 to the GP, and the consultant was 5.2. So we can see that this population, there is a lot of health problems, but we have a lot of opportunities for us to try and improve their health span because they have a lot of contact with us. When looking at modifiable lifestyle factors at this age range, we can see physical activity levels are extremely low. And only about a quarter of people are actually getting their ordeal fruit and veg. Now, the weight statistics are all self-reported, and as you know, that's notoriously unreliable. So take that with a pinch of salt. Looking at other places in the world, so a lot of you probably have heard of the blue zones. These are areas of the world where there's a really high rate of centenarians, and they suffer a fraction of the diseases that commonly kill people in other parts of the developed world. The blue zones would include Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia in Italy, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Icaria in Greece, and amongst the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. So these areas were examined and commonalities were identified that have been suggested to be responsible for these health bans. And the main ones that seem to be common amongst the areas were strong sense of family, less smoking. They ate mainly a whole food, plant-based diet, in particular really high levels of legume consumption. They have constant moderate physical activity. It is an inseparable part of their life. It's just normal for them to walk everywhere. Good social engagement as well is extremely important, so people of all ages were really socially active and integrated in their communities. So the concept behind these blue zones is that these common factors or lifestyle habits, if replicated in our own communities, could enhance our own longevity and health span. It seems pretty straightforward. Eat mostly a whole food plant-based diet, engage in your community, value family time, and get some physical activity in every day. What does it mean for us as clinicians, or even as for our family members or ourselves in the future? So whilst the science of aging is really fascinating, what actually parts of aging frighten people most? What do we worry about as we get older? The main ones that I've seen clinically are loneliness, sarcopenia, frailty, and cognitive impairment. Now obviously things like cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes are all more common in elderly populations, but other people are going to talk about this morning, so I'm just going to focus on these four. So loneliness, you might have seen really stark headlines recently such as loneliness kills or loneliness is as bad as smoking. So this is based on a large meta-analysis done in 2015 that actually showed that there's an increased likeliness of mortality for social isolation, loneliness, and living alone. So a significant portion of GP visits are related to stress and emotional well-being. Just anecdotally, I know most GPs have those patients that visit them with seemingly unexplained symptoms or really minor symptoms, possibly on a weekly basis, and that we know are actually related to this person's loneliness. For some of my patients coming in to see me might be the only social outing of that week, and the contact with the staff and the patients in the waiting room and myself are the actual therapy that they need. So loneliness is an absolute epidemic. Even those who reported that they were not lonely but lived alone, so the social isolation group, were still more at risk. So obviously those who live alone plus have a perceived feeling of loneliness would be the highest risk group. So I'm not going to come and say that plant-based diet is going to cure loneliness, because it's not. So it's going to have to be something else. So the idea of social prescribing is being used in primary care and secondary care already in Ireland, and it is really fantastic. It's a non-medical referral option that we have, and I would encourage anyone who's in GP or even in hospital to create a directory of your local community services and groups that you can refer to. Things like book clubs or men's sheds or even women's clubs, active retirement groups, community volunteering, or joining a local committee would be really beneficial for these patients. You see, there's been a lot of studies done from the James's group, so they were the first hospital group to bring in social prescribing, and the rates of attendance to the GP and to the hospital and the rates of admission went down drastically when we incorporated social prescribing. Sarcopenia, this is the gradual loss of muscle mass associated with aging, so physically inactive people are the most at risk. They lose about 5% of your muscle mass every decade after the age of 30. So the significance of this is that it leads to loss of mobility and strength, and this can eventually lead to a loss of independence, which is one of the most frightening parts of getting old. It is a factor in frailty and can increase the amount of falls and fractures in the elderly. It's widely thought to be related to high levels of oxidative stress. Frailty is a common clinical syndrome we see in older adults. It carries an increased risk for poor health outcomes, including falls, disability, hospitalization, and mortality. It's often signified by weight loss, weakness, low energy, or exhaustion, or a general slowing down. Once it's there, frailty tends to enter a vicious cycle with sarcopenia, leading to a decrease in strength, decreased walking speed, higher risk of falls, possibly then disability and dependency, and it does go into kind of a vicious cycle. So it's important to recognize it. So what are the kind of studies done on these two areas? So this study looks, it was done in the Mayo Clinic over a 3-month period, and they compared high intensity interval training against resistance training alone and combined training. There's already a large body of evidence for strength and conditioning training in into mid and older years to try and slow down or prevent sarcopenia. In particular, we use strength training for osteoporosis. But this study was trying to see, well, what does HIIT do, and should we be combining training for our older patients? And it did show that all types of training improved their lean body mass and insulin sensitivity, but only the high intensity or combined training improved their aerobic capacity and mitochondrial function. And it actually showed in those that were doing the HIIT therapy, they actually had reversal of age-related changes. So it actually showed to reverse aging. Now, in some patients, they're not going to be suitable for you to tell them to go off and do HIIT. So if possible, there might be a local resource you could use, such as MedX. If you're in the Telomeres region, it's a really good resource where it's a health professionals guided, medically supervised exercise program. And I know some of the private hospitals are now actually doing it, so UPMC is starting to do it. I think it costs €5 for a class, and all of these exercise classes are then medically supervised, so it's a great option. So what about diet? So on to kind of the main topic. So there's a lot of evidence that as we get older, we actually tend to eat less, and the food we tend to eat is of really poor quality, and our menu becomes quite limited, and that's for various factors. It might be influenced by the person's ability to prepare food, perhaps the death of a spouse that did all the cooking, poor access to fresh food, issues with mastication, denture issues. There is limited studies looking at nutrition, in particular with sarcopenia. There's a lot more on frailty. But systemic reviews of the issue have shown that most of the evidence suggests that a Mediterranean diet rich in whole foods and whole grains are protective against sarcopenia. I think it's important when considering dieting those who are frail, because they're eating less, the food that they do eat needs to be really nutrient dense, and they might be candidates for certain supplements as well. Looking at diet and frailty, this is a lovely study that came out this month in the Gut Journal. It was done across 5 European countries, and it looked at 1 year of Mediterranean diet to try and alter the gut microbiome and reduce frailty. So they profiled the gut microbiome of 612 volunteers. These were non-frail or pre-frail subjects. Then they put in their new age diet intervention, which was basically a whole food plant-based diet with a little bit of fish. And it showed that bacteria enriched by adherence to the diet were positively associated with several markers of lower frailty and improved cognitive function. And it was negatively associated with inflammatory markers like CRP or interleukin-17, which we know drives disease. So their conclusion was that improving the habitual diet to modulate gut microbiome has the potential to promote healthier aging and reduce frailty. One thing when considering an elderly population you might be a little bit concerned about is fractures. Do I really want to tell this person to reduce their dairy intake? Is that safe? So a lovely review article just came out in the New England Journal of Medicine looking at this, looking at all of the evidence on dairy consumption and health. The review had a lot of conclusions. I'm just going to focus on the ones that are relevant to my talk. Overall, the evidence does not support a benefit of high dairy consumption for the prevention of fractures. In fact, it showed that in countries with a higher milk consumption, there was actually a higher incidence of hip fractures. Overall, it said, look, there's no requirement for humans to consume dairy for health, and that it may in fact have negative consequences for health. So it's just a nice one to be a little bit more reassured, because it was an area that even I was a bit nervous about for an older person. And then finally on to cognitive impairment. I think one of the biggest fears that people have about getting older is the development of cognitive impairment or dementia. And vascular disease is one of the most preventable causes of dementia. A diagnosis of Alzheimer's is often given with dread. It doesn't just affect the patient, it causes an emotional and physical toll on their loved ones as well. there's still no effective cure, so we really need to be looking at preventative measures. When considering what is good for vascular health, we must remember that these systems don't operate in isolation. It's not just the cardiovascular system, it's not the peripheral vascular system. They're all connected. So what's good for your cardiovascular system is going to be good for your cerebrovascular system. And atherosclerosis is known to cause vascular dementia, and more evidence is coming out that it is causing Alzheimer's disease as well. So this is just a nice study looking at those who treated their vascular risk factors in Alzheimer's disease versus those who didn't, and basically it showed that MMSE progression over time differed significantly between the two groups, one who was aggressively treated for their vascular risk factors and one who's not. So it just again highlights the importance of our vascular risk factors in our Alzheimer's patients. So globally, the lowest rates of dementia are in rural India. We eat a mainly plant-based diet. There are a lot of migration studies that have shown increased incidence of Alzheimer's disease when you take someone from a particular ethnic group and move them from their homeland to a more Western country and they start to adopt our diet, the incidence of Alzheimer's disease shoots up. It happens again in countries that start to adopt a Western diet, such as in Japan. So they show that the rate of Alzheimer's disease shot up as their alcohol consumption, animal products, high meat, and lowered rice supply occurred. So their conclusion was that Alzheimer's disease rates will continue rising in these non-Western countries unless they started to address the major risk factors, and the big one being diet. This was a nice study, the Adventist Health Study, a lot of you probably know it. This particularly looked at the incidence of dementia and intake of animal product. And it showed that matched subjects who ate meat were more than twice as likely to develop dementia as their vegetarian counterparts. One really nice study is the MIND diet as well, and the MIND diet is basically a hybrid of the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, but it is mostly a whole food plant-based diet, but it specifies that the person has to be eating berries and green leafy veg. The reason they specify this is there's an already existing body of evidence for their cognitive protective effects, particularly from the Nurses' Health Study. So the MIND diet study showed that those who rigidly stuck to the MIND diet scores got the equivalent of 7.5 years younger in age for cognitive function. Now that's incredible. They then wanted to see the other two big ones were the PREDIMED study and the DASH study. So these have both shown that their diets were very good for cognitive health, particularly the PREDIMED study. So the MIND people wanted to see, well, which one's the best. So they did a comparison trial between the three diets, and basically it showed that the MIND diet, you can see there was a significant difference between those who stuck to it very rigidly, which is the top line, than those who really didn't stick to it. But even those who moderately adhered to it did show a protective effect when considering the MIND diet. Looking at the DASH diet, definitely there was protective effect, but you have to stick to it rigidly in order to get results. And then the Mediterranean diet, similar, but not quite as good as the MIND with the moderate group, but just as good if you were going to stick to it really, really tightly. 54% risk reduction in Alzheimer's dementia rates. Another nice study that just came out, so looking at dietary flavonols and the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And basically it's trying to link the consumption of flavonols because of their high antioxidants and the risk of Alzheimer's disease. And it showed that those who consumed the highest amount had a risk reduction of up to 50% for Alzheimer's disease, independent of traditional cardiovascular and genetic risk factors. So some dietary examples of flavonols would be onions, ginger, broccoli, green leafy veg, wine, tea, citrus fruits, purple foods, and soy products. So just a little bit about physical activity as well, because there's a really good body of evidence that this is important as well. So this is a meta-analysis of prospective studies, basically showing a significant reduction in the risk of dementia associated with midlife exercise. It significantly reduced later life risks of mild cognitive impairment as well. Among patients with pre-existing mild cognitive impairment or dementia, randomized controlled trials showed better cognitive scores after 6 to 12 months of exercise compared to sedentary controls. So these had improved cognitive scores and even significantly larger hippocampal volumes and better spatial memory. This is another lovely study that just came out this year from the British, from the BMJ, and basically it's looking at these 5 lifestyle factors that they consider to be low risk factors. So never having smoked, being normal BMI, having moderate to vigorous physical activity every day, moderate alcohol intake, and a high diet quality score. Now their diet quality score was high score for whole veg, fruits, and negative for meat and sugar sweetened drinks and processed food. So for those who had all 5 low risk factors, so all 5 beneficial, they actually got a decade more of health span. So a decade more of life free of cancer, cardiovascular disease, or type 2 diabetes versus those who didn't have any of those protective factors. So back to the beginning of the talk, and I just mentioned some telomere studies. This was done basically on the Mediterranean diet and the telomere length. And it was done in 2014, and the results show that those who adhered to a strict Mediterranean diet had statistically significant longer telomeres, which we know from earlier is a sign of aging. So, and finally, what about the future of aging? So there's really interesting research going on at the moment about aging. I'm not going to go into it all, it's still very much in research phase. People are saying that we could potentially extend our lifespan to 150 or 200 even beyond. And the main things that seem to be cropping up are caloric restriction, which has the most evidence at the moment, cold therapy, and brown fat mitochondrial activation, epigenomics, metformin actually for longevity, and then this idea of sirtuins and supplementing resveratrol and some NAD boosters. So I would encourage everyone to kind of have a look at what's out there. It is quite an exciting area of research. Just briefly, I'm going to touch on caloric restriction because it's the one that has the most evidence at the moment. One of the common theories as to why this works is that having just enough food to function in healthy ways engages the survival circuit, telling our longevity genes to boost cellular defenses, ward off disease, minimize epigenetic change, and actually slow down aging. So there's been a lot of mice studies mainly, and suggest that it can help expand their lifespan. Okinawa, say one of the blue zones, they typically eat about 2/3 of the calories of mainland Japan. That could be part of why they live so much longer. Important part of it is the calorie restriction has to be well balanced. It actually has to occur without malnutrition, so you have to be getting enough nourishment in the food that you are eating. This was a really interesting experiment. Basically, it was originally done as a mission for maintaining human life in outer space, but they ended up not being able to grow enough food, so they ended up doing a trial of caloric restriction incidentally, and it showed that their metabolism became really efficient at extracting nutrients. They had a lot of improved markers in their BMI, their blood pressure, their blood sugars, their cholesterol, and some of the cellular changes that are associated with aging were reversed. So it was an accidental study, but really interesting. Some of the more applicable ones to us will be done in rhesus monkeys. They're a little bit more relevant to us than mice. But basically it showed this researcher, one monkey actually had a record longevity after they put him on this intermittent fasting. So it would be the equivalent to human living 130 years. So they've gotten really interesting research done on animal models so far, but unfortunately it's quite hard to get human volunteers to reduce their eating if they're not already obese. So there hasn't been a lot of human studies. But to conclude, live as the blue zones do. Try and move every day, do a mixture of HIIT and strength training. Connect with your family, friends and communities. Eat a whole food plant-based diet. Potentially practice time restricted eating, definitely something to watch out for. And just keep an eye on emerging research. It's really interesting and it's a really fast-growing field. And finally, just to inspire you, this is Fuja Singh. He's now 108 and he's the oldest living person to run a marathon, and he ran his last marathon in London at the age of 101. And that's it. Thank you.